Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
Pint Glass Football. I'm your host, Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? Free agency is over. The draft is over. Now it's time to look at which teams in the NFL are the most improved and least improved this offseason. But joining me, like always, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what is going on?
Well, surprise, surprise, Brad. It finally happened.
Alex, it did, because we were putting together our list here of our most improved and least improved NFL teams. And it turns out that I've got a team on my most improved that ended up on your least improved team. So let's jump into it, Alex. The LA Chargers on both lists. Why don't you start, Alex, here? Because obviously we have a stark difference of opinion on what they did this offseason. So why don't you kind of give me some points on why you think this is one of the least improved teams in the NFL?
Okay, so let's just start at the top, and literally the top. We know one of the good things that the Chargers have finally done is invest in a head coach. So we know that's Jim Harbaugh. Now let's stay at the top. Looking at their offensive coordinator, Greg Roman. Now, I know Greg Roman has worked well with Jim Harbaugh and things as such, but I don't know if his philosophies work well with this quarterback in terms of what we've seen Greg Roman and what he can be in this league when he's calling all the plays. But I know the pushback is that Jim Harbaugh is going to upset that. Okay, fine. Let's get to the actual piece of the team that matters more, which is the talent. They didn't do anything at wide receiver. And what I mean by that is, yes, they went and got Ladd McConkey. However, they're going to be starting Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, two players that would not be starting, and none of you would ever draft them in your top 5 to 6 rounds on a fantasy roster if they even were the starter. So we can start there. We know what they did on the back end with Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson, but they were back end picks for a reason, even though we had high praise for Brendan Rice. They did do Ladd McConkey, so they have a slot, but on the outside, they have nothing, and you have this cannon of a guy who is being touted, and I'm using air quotes when I say that, and Justin Herbert as a guy. You lost a really good, solid tight end in Gerald Everett. You replaced it with low-end Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst, hoping that they can equal that one player. Then you also talk about, okay, they went and got Joe Alt. There's nothing we can say about that draft. They really have a solid offensive line if everybody remains healthy. However, people have been talking about, well, he's going to run. Okay, cool. You're doing that with J.K. Dobbins? Anybody seen J.K. Dobbins in the last 3 years? Good player when healthy, but when's the last time he's been healthy? And then Gus Edwards, solid player, but he's not a bell cow back. And they didn't do anything in the draft. They did get Kamani Vidal in the 6th round, but hey, maybe he is something, maybe he isn't. I don't know. But looking at this offensive setup, I know the offensive line is good, but the actual skill set positions outside of Justin Herbert has a lot to be desired for. So for even just starting there at the offense alone, I'm still struggling to find where they truly improved.
Yeah, it's all valid points, no doubt about it, Alex. But the reason this team ended up on my list of one of the most improved teams, you hit it right off the top, Jim Harbaugh. And when you bring in a guy who I think was easily the best head coach option this offseason, a proven guy with a proven track record of success like a Jim Harbaugh, to me, we could almost stop right there. That alone makes you one of the most improved teams. But on top of that, you're right. They did lose Keenan Allen. They lost Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Eric Kendricks. These are all quality players. But when you kind of look a little closer, Mike Williams is a guy who just can't stay healthy. I totally understand getting rid of Austin Eckler. You can't pay a guy like Austin Eckler, and they were going to have to. So I understand that move too. Kendricks is 32 years old. Keenan Allen is 32 years old. And even though he's a really good player, I think at that point, do you really want to keep paying these older players, or do you want to get younger? Clearly, they wanted to get younger. I like the moves that they made. And like I said, free agency, you can make a case that they did lose some key players here. But when you add a guy like Harbaugh, and then they had what we gave as an A-plus draft, they just hit it out of the park. I mean, this class, top to bottom, was one of the only classes that there wasn't a single pick I didn't like. Like you mentioned, Joe Alt, best tackle in this class. Now you have bookend left tackles. Ladd McConkey, one of the more underrated receivers in this draft. I think he's an instant impact guy. Junior Colson gives them a spark at the linebacker position. I love the two corners that they took, both fantastic picks in the mid-round. Kamani Vidal, the running back out of Troy, you mentioned the running back room being weaker. This guy was on my sleeper list, and he is truly one of my favorite sleepers. I think he's an electric player, and I think he's a steal in the 6th round. Basically, they get a guy who instantly becomes a younger, faster version of Austin Eckler. So you're replacing a guy who fits that role of what you're losing with Eckler. Brendan Rice was a 3rd-round grade. So you're getting a guy who I think is a plug-and-play starter in the 7th round. Yes, they're young at receiver, and yes, they lost some veteran guys, but the youth movement here for this team, the A-plus grade that they had throughout this draft, getting rid of some of these older players and some of these guys who can't stay healthy and bringing in a coach like Harbaugh, to me, it's just a home run all the way around for a team that had gone so cheap and had missed on so many coaches for so long. They finally take a big swing and go get a proven guy. To me, that alone was just enough for me to feel like they were one of the most improved teams.
Everybody, throughout this episode, you're probably going to hear me specifically contradict myself simply because there's the draft grade and then there's the overall grade of what the team did. So there's a mixture of a few things that I'm saying here. But defensively looking, we know next year Joey Bosa and probably Khalil Mack both will be going, and I could probably say even Derwin James. So coach aside, I just think from a talent standpoint, they're just going to struggle because they're in a little bit of cap hell, even though they'll be able to restructure probably Justin Herbert next year. But they're still going to have to go get running backs. They're still going to have to go get wide receivers. And like I said, next year I can probably, I really want to hedge my bet and say Bosa, Khalil, and Derwin James will not be a part of this team going into next year. So they'll be looking at replacing some high productive players as well.
Cowboys fans, you're going to have to cover your ears here because America's team is on my list of the least improved teams in the NFL. Alex, they had a quiet free agency. They really only added Eric Kendricks, who we just talked about from the Chargers, a quality player, but I think a guy who's clearly past his prime. And he's really a guy that they brought in because Leighton Vander Esch retired. The Cowboys lost Tyron Smith, Tyler Biadasz, Tony Pollard, and Dorrance Armstrong in this offseason. That's some key veteran players here that this Cowboys team lost. They signed Zeke Elliott after not drafting a running back, which is, I think, was shocking. You bring in Zeke Elliott back to the Cowboys, a guy that I don't know if there's really any gas left in the tank there. We talked about their draft. Didn't like the Tyler Guyton pick at offensive tackle. He's going to have to switch sides and become a week 1 starter. I think that's going to be problematic. They took Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan, guard Cooper Beebe in the 3rd round. Quality picks, kind of saved their draft a little bit. In the 5th round, cornerback Kalen Carson was another guy that we liked the value there. So they didn't have a terrible draft, but we gave them a B- grade. I just don't think they improved enough, Alex, in the short term. I didn't see them making a big enough improvement and losing too many key pieces, taking that step forward. I actually see them taking a step back this year.
One of my most improved teams, Brad, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, we know they're a consummate team that they don't rebuild, they just retool. But what they did this year, they did something that they never truly really do, which is go after a big name free agent, in this case, Russell Wilson. And not only did they do that, they overturned the entire QB room by moving on from everybody that was there last year and now bringing in Russell Wilson and trading for Justin Fields, which I think is going to do a world of difference. I want to talk further about that because they also brought in offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. We talk about coaches a lot. Some coaches are just better suited to be coordinators, and I think Arthur Smith is one of those guys. And now you bring him with not one, but two reclamation projects in the sense of Russell Wilson, who's actually more proven, but then also you give him Justin Fields. So not only are the Steelers set up for right now, they're also set up for the future in Justin Fields. And now you give him A fully revamped in a 2-year process, a revamped offensive line. The last 2 years, they drafted Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, and brought in Isaac Samula, and also got Zach Frazier. So that's a fully revamped offensive line. They brought in Roman Wilson to kind of replace what they lost in the trade for Deontay Johnson. He's going to look good. You're going to expect bigger and better things from George Pickens, and we know what Steelers Nation does when they get a hold of a wide receiver. And not to mention, with that Deontay Johnson trade, it also netted them Dante Jackson at cornerback, who is a solid quarterback. He's not a world beater. And then you also finally went and got an inside linebacker, Patrick Queen, that suits what you do best, which is have a guy that can roam out there and make a lot of tackles. And Patrick Queen, this team is trending upward, and it looks like they're going to be able to possibly make a deep run in this year's playoffs if everything falls in place the way that it's set up.
So my other least improved team, Alex, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, they added Eric Armstead, quality player. They also signed wide receiver Gabe Davis, but this is a guy who's coming over after a down year. They got rid of Calvin Ridley, so I'm not really sure the wide receiver room got better with free agency. They lost Darius Williams, one of their best cornerbacks last season. And in the draft, we talked about it a while back here on the draft grade episodes, of course. They take Brian Thomas Jr. at pick 23. Good player. I mean, we really like this guy, but they needed cornerback desperately. And they could have taken the first one off the board. They had their pick there of any corner, and that is such a glaring hole that I really don't like that they went with Brian Thomas with that pick. Now, in the draft, they addressed some key positions of need. I'll give them that. But as we talked about in the draft grade episode, they reached on almost every single one of them. We gave them a C grade for their draft. I didn't think their free agency period was that great either. When you combine the two and you kind of look at it from a helicopter view here, Alex, this is a team that is really looking to take the next step. And this was not the offseason that they wanted.
And perhaps overall, Brad, and I want to talk about offseason to include coaching. The entire defensive staff was fired. Mike Caldwell and 7 of his assistants were fired after these were the same guys that went to bat to keep Josh Allen, and he showed up and they showed why they fought for him. And we actually got Trayvon Walker to actually step up this year as well. And getting rid of your entire defensive staff after they looked like they were taking some steps and they were starting to get some of those young players to come in and take over is going to be a big hit, because we don't know what this new defensive staff is going to look like with these players truly. And it's really going to be Doug Peterson and perhaps even Trent Baalke's head on a platter at the end of this season if this team does not take a step forward. My last least improved team is the Washington Commanders. There's a lot of buzz around the Washington Commanders. They got new coaching. They had all $100 million or more to spend in free agency. And now they did spend a lot of money in free agency on the Bobby Wagners and the Frankie Louvuls and Jeremy Chins, players that we all like. They tried to revamp that offensive line. However, you go and you get Tyler Biadasz, the center from Dallas. Low end guy that's just going to be solid. You're trying to, but then you also went and spent a lot of money on Nick Allegretti, who was the backup guard for Kansas City. He just filled in during the playoffs. We don't know what he is. You have Cornelius Lucas, I don't think, which is one of their biggest issues in offensive line. I'm not sure they did what they need to do here with the offensive line to make it better. I know they got Brandon Coleman in the 3rd round, but this was a very deep offensive line draft, and they only went to the well in the draft once. And even in free agency, none of the big money was spent on any offensive linemen. And even still talking about the defensive line, though they moved on from Montez Sweat and Chase Young, they did not spend any money or do anything with all the money they spent. They didn't do anything on the defensive line. So now you're sitting here with your bookends as Dorrance Armstrong and Cleveland Ferrell of Raiders fame. Is that does that excite anybody in Washington? I didn't think so. You still have your interior, but one of those guys is going to be gone next year because you brought in Johnny Newton in the 2nd round. You drafted him. You did some things with, Jaden Daniels. Obviously, you were going to go after quarterback. It was just a matter of which one you were going to go after. I am going to continuously always go to coaching. You now have brought in Dan Quinn as your head coach, who I'm not a big fan of in Dan Quinn, so we'll just have to see. But you went and you got Cliff Kingsbury. Now, Cliff Kingsbury looked great at USC with Caleb Williams, but I'm not sure if Cliff Kingsbury is a good match for this team. Already know, not a big fan of Jaden Daniels. I view him as a boom or bust player. So even though they have new management, you've added some pizzazz, bringing in Magic Johnson. I do like the fact that they did bring back Darryl Green as a guy that's been away from the organization for so long. There's a very cool YouTube on how they said they're going to retire his number that people should check out. I do appreciate that as a football fan, but I'm not sure in terms of what they're going to put on the field this year. There's a lot of excitement around Jane Daniels, but I'm not sure that this is going to work, and I don't know where this defense is going currently. I guess the whole thing is just really bent on Dan Quinn fixing the defense and Cliff Kingsbury being who most people think he might be.
Did you know that Pint Glass Football is more than just this podcast? We have an exclusive newsletter. Sign up for free at pintglassfootball.com to receive articles and insights delivered straight to your inbox. But wait, there's more. We're excited to announce our brand new YouTube channel. Not only can you listen to our podcast on YouTube, but you'll also find exclusive video content waiting for you. So hit the pause button right now and go subscribe to our newsletter, and hit that subscribe button on YouTube to stay connected with the latest football news and our exclusive content. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. I personally love the pick'em game. Just pick between 2 and 5 players to build a pick'em entry. Pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Download the Underdog Fantasy app and sign up today with promo code PGF. That's promo code PGF to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. The official ticketing app of Pint Glass Football is now SeatGeek. I can't recommend them enough, guys. I've been using SeatGeek for years. You want to go to a game this season? SeatGeek is here to take the confusion out of buying tickets, making sure you get the best seats at the best prices. With SeatGeek, you'll never have to worry about overpaying for tickets again. How? They put a 0 to 10 score on each ticket, so you know you're getting a good deal. But here's the real game changer. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase with the code PGFPOD. That's right, $20 off with code PGFPOD. This season, make every game day epic with SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and remember to enter the code PGFPOD to grab your $20 discount. All right, my last most improved team here on the list, Alex. How about the Chicago Bears? Key additions for this team, of course, Caleb Williams, number 1 overall pick, a guy who I think is a very, very special quarterback, and a guy who I think has the potential to develop into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Rome Odunze, they also took in the first round, as we know, big-time wide receiver, a guy that Alex and I really, really like in this class. Instantly gives this young quarterback another weapon. They add Keenan Allen in free agency. So now you go from a team that really lacked weapons to one of the best wide receiver rooms in the NFL. They go and draft the offensive tackle from Yale, a guy that we both really like, a guy with big-time upside. Austin Booker, the edge defender, the pass rusher from Kansas, another player that they got in this draft that both of us thought was a great value in the 5th round. In free agency, they added Kevin Byard, DeAndre Swift, Gerald Everett. I think those might not be the splashiest free agent moves, but they're solid. And they're guys that are going to contribute to this team right away. I also want to add here, Alex, that Chicago re-signed star cornerback Jalen Johnson. This is one of the best young corners in the league, and it was a pretty team-friendly deal too. So I got to give him credit there. GM Ryan Poles, this guy has done a great job rebuilding this roster. Now, look, they're still behind the Packers and they're still behind the Lions, I think, as far as top to bottom talent. But what a big improvement this offseason for this Bears squad.
Last but not least, a team that always has been quiet ever since they moved on from Andrew Luck. A team that's just simply been quiet. And I always say this, I use a baseball term when I describe the Indianapolis Colts. They don't necessarily hit home runs, but they don't strike out, and they consistently double after double after double after double. And once again, they did it again this year. I'll start here, and it's going to be an under the radar signing that a lot of people are not going to talk about, but to me, it means something. Bringing in Joe Flacco to tutor Anthony Richardson, who has great character, shows incredible leadership skills, but needs a lot of fine tuning in terms of the actually playing quarterback in this league, is a huge under the radar move that I think is going to benefit them on the back end. They had a guy like that in Gardner Minshew. Obviously, he took over and earned himself an opportunity to start in other places. Go Raiders. But bringing in Joe Flacco here is really good for Anthony Richardson, who's going to need to learn to how to play this pro game because he has such an incredible skill set. They didn't do a lot in free agency, but what they did do, they made a huge impact in the draft. I think in Matt Goncalves in the third round out of Pittsburgh and Tanner Bortolini, I think those are two great players. Goncalves can play both tackle spots. Bortolini can play either guard position or center position, so they have a lot of versatility, and now they have full depth. Getting A.D. Mitchell, which I thought was a great grab because he's a perfect complement as a speed guy and as a true X guy running down the field, and Michael Pittman, who plays more that Michael Irvin role, a great possession receiver. He's been re-signed, and Josh Downs from last year. So now you have your full array of wide receivers that you can go with. But then defensively, getting Latu, again, injuries, but he was the best pass rusher in the game. And they already have Buckner, Stewart, Kwity Paye on that line. So this is a guy that can come in and rotate and help them with the rush. And then what they did in terms of bringing back, making sure they kept Kenny Moore. Again, not a lot of big names, but simply doubles and solid contributors that are going to be able to be day one contributors on this team, and perhaps because we know what Houston has done, but perhaps be able to make a run and make it interesting. And I think overall, I keep referencing what we're going to do in the future because it's going to be so much fun, because as I've been going through a lot of this process, me and Brad, this South does not look as bad as people think it may look. It's going to be very interesting when we get to the projections for the South.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Indy is kind of flying under the radar here in this offseason. I'm glad that you highlighted them. Now, I thought they needed to address the cornerback position in the draft, and that was really my only knock with their first pick, because they could have taken any one of those corners that were still on the board at 15 and really helped that secondary. However, the only other way to help a secondary without addressing it specifically is to go and get a pass rusher. And they did that with Leatu Latu, the best defensive player in this class. A.D. Mitchell, you go and get an X receiver, like you mentioned, big time talent, big time upside. I love that they address the offensive line in the third and fourth round with the guys that you mentioned, because you've got that young quarterback. Go get some guys to help protect him. And a guy that I mentioned briefly on the draft grade episodes, Anthony Gould, wide receiver out of Oregon State. I think he is going to start week one as a kick and punt returner. He is an explosive returner, a guy that adds a little bit of depth at wide receiver, but I think he's going to be specifically a special teams guy, and he's going to give them a spark. So this was a kind of under the radar, nice offseason for the Indy Colts. If you enjoy the podcast, do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. We continue to move into the off-season storylines. Another episode coming soon. Of course, exclusive YouTube coverage as well. But once again, guys, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.
Zencastr is the ultimate web-based podcasting solution. It provides high-quality audio and video podcast production and hosting. With a full suite of professional tools, podcasters can seamlessly record, produce, and publish studio-quality content all from one dashboard. Zencastr's post-production process takes the headache out of audio production. Set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. Coordinating all your guests to record in person is painful and tedious. Easily invite up to 11 participants per recording with one click. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code PGFP, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.